Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on consumer and producer surplus. Today, we'll explore how these economic concepts help us measure the gains from trade and understand their impact on market prices, overall welfare, and policy decisions. I'm excited to dive into these important ideas with you and show how they influence both theory and real-world markets. Let's get started. Here on the right, we explore the concept of surplus in a market, starting with buyer surplus. Buyer surplus is essentially the difference between the highest price a buyer is willing to pay for a product and the actual market price they end up paying. This surplus represents the extra value or benefit the buyer gains from the transaction. Next, we have seller surplus, which works a bit differently. This is the difference between the market price and the seller's minimum willingness to accept. In other words, it reflects the additional gain sellers make when the market price exceeds their lowest acceptable price. Together, these surpluses help us understand the gains and benefits for both buyers and sellers in a marketplace. The image to the left illustrates this idea vividly with a market scene, showing interaction where both parties negotiate and potentially enjoy surplus value. Here we focus on the concept of consumer surplus, which is essentially the advantage buyers gain in a market transaction. Consumer surplus is defined as the difference between the maximum amount a buyer is willing to pay for a product and the actual price they end up paying. For instance, if someone values an item at a higher price than what it's sold for, they experience a surplus, essentially extra value or benefit. This benefit becomes more significant when prices drop or when buyers' willingness to pay increases. So, consumer surplus represents the economic gain consumers enjoy, making it a key measure of buyer satisfaction and market efficiency. Here we have the concept of producer surplus, which is essentially the benefit that sellers receive in the market. Producer surplus is defined as the difference between the price at which sellers actually sell their goods and the minimum amount they would be willing to accept. Think of it this way. If a fruit vendor is willing to sell mangoes for at least $1 each, but the market price is $1.50. The extra 50 cents per mango represents their producer surplus. This surplus grows larger when market prices increase, or when it becomes cheaper for sellers to produce their goods, meaning they can keep more profit above their minimum acceptable price. The image of the fruit cart here symbolizes these sellers, who gain from favorable market prices. Here we're exploring key concepts related to market equilibrium and total surplus. First, consumer surplus represents the benefit consumers get when they pay less than what they're actually willing to pay. You can visualize this as the area above the market price, but below the demand curve. Next, we have producer surplus, which is the benefit producers enjoy when they sell a product at a price higher than their minimum supply cost. This corresponds to the area below the market price and above the supply curve. Finally, total surplus is the combined sum of both consumer and producer surpluses. This total reflects the overall efficiency and the total benefit generated by the market. This image of a businessman with a tablet underscores the practical, real-world application of these concepts in modern business environments. Now let's talk about how to measure surplus on a graph. Surplus is essentially the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay, as well as the difference between what producers are willing to accept and what they actually receive. On the graph, this is represented by the area between the demand curve and the market price for consumers. For producers, it's the area between the market price and the supply curve. This shaded area changes as the price and quantity change, which makes surplus a valuable tool for comparing different market outcomes and understanding the benefits to both consumers and producers. Let's look at what raises or lowers consumer surplus. Starting with the factors that increase it, consumer surplus tends to rise when prices fall, demand gets stronger, or buyers have better information and more options to choose from. On the other hand, several factors decrease consumer surplus. It shrinks when prices go up, competition weakens, or when taxes and regulatory restrictions push market prices higher. To give you a clearer picture, we have a comparison of consumer surplus under different price conditions. This horizontal bar chart illustrates how consumer surplus changes when prices are lower, currently set, or higher, highlighting the significant impact that price levels have on consumer benefit. Producer surplus can shift depending on several factors. Let's first look at what increases it. When market prices go up, producers receive more for their goods, which naturally boosts their surplus. Similarly, if production costs decrease or if firms become more efficient in their operations, they can produce at a lower expense, increasing their overall benefit. On the flip side, producer surplus decreases due to certain challenges. Taxes, shortages in input materials, and price controls all can lower the price producers get or raise their costs. These issues cut into the profits that producers typically enjoy, reducing the surplus. Understanding these dynamics helps us see how market conditions directly impact producer outcomes. Here we see how taxes and price controls affect the market surplus. When taxes, price ceilings, or price floors are introduced, they change the way the surplus is divided between buyers and sellers. This shift disrupts the market equilibrium, meaning that the amount of goods bought and sold is no longer optimal. Now, this leads to something called deadweight loss. Essentially, deadweight loss represents the total surplus lost because these policies prevent trades that would have benefited both parties. So, even though taxes and price controls may be implemented with good intentions, they can cause inefficiencies by reducing the overall gains from trade in the market. The image of the wooden house with stacks of coins emphasizes how these economic factors play a crucial role in financial outcomes, especially in markets like real estate investments. Thank you all for your attention. To recap, consumer surplus shows the benefit buyers get from paying less than they're willing to, while producer surplus reflects the seller's gains from selling at a higher price than their cost. When we combine these, total surplus represents the overall value created by market exchanges. How this surplus is divided depends on prices, production costs, and policy decisions. And these factors also influence whether markets operate efficiently. We're now happy to take any questions you have and look forward to a great discussion.